Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello. Welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Francis, Tom, what a week to be talking about fintech. But how are you guys doing? Tom, what's new in your world?
What's new? Honestly, not that much. We've had a pretty standard week in terms of news. It hasn't been the busiest news week, so that's why I'm quite excited to get into this podcast and dive into some of the more interesting pieces that we've been speaking about in the last 7 days or so. But no, honestly, not too much. But I'm excited to be back nonetheless.
Fantastic news. And Francis, how about you?
Pretty much the same, to be honest. I'm very happy to be here to talk some fintech with you guys today. I like the look of the stories we've brought to the table, so it should be a good one.
Fantastic stuff. Well, speaking of stories brought to the table, what are you going to be talking about this week? Francis, what's your article on?
I'm going to be discussing the cost of living crisis and how the UK's attitude differs to the rest of Europe.
Amazing stuff. And Tom, how about you?
This week, I'm going to be talking about how Nigeria is setting its sights on drastic digital transformation by training 3 million people in tech.
Fantastic. And I'm going to be talking about Saga and Flagstone's new partnership for an over 50s fintech savings platform. So 3 very different stories this week. I like the variety. We love that. I am going to pick on Francis to go first because why not?
Okay then. Now, happy to go first. So, as we all know, the cost of living crisis has been hitting everyone across the globe, really, but especially in Europe and the UK. You know, cost of living has absolutely skyrocketed due to high interest rates and just high inflation as well. The Bank of England recently stagnated its interest rate growth for the first time after, I believe it was 14 consecutive rises, to stay at 5.25%. But what I found really interesting in this article from CRIF, the European Digital Transformation Solutions provider, was that despite what everyone might think about cost of living, it turns out that UK residents tend to be less worried about it impacting their credit history and their credit score. And I just thought it was really interesting to sort of think about that, especially when you think about how accessible finance is nowadays and how much financial organizations really do to try and help you get a good credit score and help you get access to these financial products, really. And I thought it was interesting to see that the UK's attitude doesn't really reflect that it's that grateful of it. It almost seems like they're taking it for granted a little bit. And I just thought it was really interesting to see the comparison, really, because, for example, the average in Europe, excluding the UK, according to CRIF, that 37% of people are worried about the impact their credit score will have, with people in France, or I should say nearly 50%, 49% of people in France are the most concerned about it. And as I mentioned, it is just interesting to see that despite constant news coverage of rising interest rates and this constant fear that, I might not be earning enough, I might not be able to buy groceries this week, I might not be able to pay the bills or whatever it might be, it just less than half of Brits in the report felt that the cost of living crisis had made them more mindful about getting into debt in the future. So I think I just wanted to bring this to the table, really, to sort of get your guys' thoughts on, does this really surprise you? Is there anything do you think it's organizations that need to do more to change this attitude, or does it really lie with the customers, us, I suppose? Tom, I'll go to you first.
I can't decide whether I'm surprised by this or not, really. I feel like if anyone's going to be really nonchalant about this type of increase in economic pressure, maybe it is people in this country. It'll get better, it's fine, that kind of attitude. But another part of me thinks perhaps it is something that I think we spoke about either last week or the week before, was the importance of financial education, and whether there's just not enough of that in this country. And you can kind of call back on that here. People aren't really aware of the kind of impact that increasing interest rates have on their everyday lives, what it could have on their credit scores. And perhaps it's just a case of education when people aren't aware of what's going on. I remember reading an article a long time ago when they maybe like a year ago when the interest rates were still going up at the time, but they were not as high as they are now. And the majority of people that they surveyed in the UK had no idea actually the impact it was having. Like they didn't understand where these rises were going to occur. They didn't understand, how it was going to impact them day to day, if it would at all. And a lot of people wrongly believed that it was going to affect parts of their lives that it wouldn't. So I think perhaps a lot of this is to do with people just aren't actually aware, even today, after 14 consecutive rises, of the significant impact that it can have on their lives. And perhaps that's why they're less concerned, is because it's not something at the forefront of their minds.
See, that's really interesting because I think when you say it like that, it makes it sound like the onus is more on the companies to make, because I think they're the ones that really have to help educate people that don't know. Because I think there's only so much that a consumer, well, I say that, there's only so much an organization can do to really help a consumer to get to that point where they are in classified, I suppose, as financially educated. Whereas when I see this, I tend to think that it's more on the consumers really to really sort of pay attention to it, because like I said, we've definitely seen a lot of organizations, be it banks or other fintechs or whatever it might be, really stepping up to sort of let people know about, education and how it can really help them. So I think it's a really interesting point of view what you've just said there, Tom, because I think it does show perhaps that more can be done by organizations, because at the end of the day, financial education is incredibly important. And I guess you're right, it's just it doesn't, the levels aren't high enough really to let people know. Polly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you both have said already. I do agree with Tom, and if there's anyone to like just not be bothered about something, it is the British public, and just be like, yeah, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. And I think that that's kind of the two attitudes that I'm hearing, just like in my like personal life, like talking to people about it. Either it's yeah, it'll be fine, or people like being really worried about it. I think it's really interesting the data that has been presented and the fact that sort of the UK don't seem concerned compared to a lot of Europe. That's quite interesting to me. And I guess, yeah, I think there is a little bit of work here that perhaps the banks and lenders and other organizations, like you were just saying, maybe they do need to be a bit more involved in order to ensure like people are using credit responsibly and are able to afford repaying that credit and other sort of financial solutions of a similar thing, because maybe then people aren't worried about it, but perhaps they should be, depending on like how they're using the credit offered to them. Like if people are not worried about it because they're putting their energy bills on a credit card and forgetting about it, then that's the issue there. And so that's a really interesting idea. I think that probably is going to be explored a little bit more, I'd imagine, by banks and lenders if they're not doing it already, because it doesn't seem like this cost of living situation is going anywhere. We keep talking about it, and it's all we hear about at the moment. And I know the last interest rate, the Bank of England interest rate stayed the same, so which people took as a positive, but is that going to continue to happen, or is it going to go back up, back down? We don't know. Hopefully, it's not going to be a situation for much longer, and we're going to kind of get back economically to where we were a few years ago. That would be nice, but who's to say? But I do find this very interesting, and I definitely think that there's some work to be done here about being a bit more mindful about your debt and your own finances as you navigate through a situation like this. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you sort of brought up is when you like talk to people and they say, "Oh, I don't really care," and it's like you both said it, like the British public just doesn't really care. But I think it's not even that they don't care and that they're aware of it. I think the majority of people, or not, maybe not the majority, maybe that's being a bit dramatic, but I think a lot of people probably wouldn't even know if you said to them how many times has maybe not how many times, because that's possibly quite niche, but have interest rates risen recently? I think some people would genuinely be like, no idea. And because of that, it's just that awareness and well, yes, awareness of the financial situation that's going around them right now and how it can really impact them. So I think it is interesting to see that how the UK differs. Is that just a cultural thing, or perhaps it's the organizations? I mean, time will tell, and like you said, Polly, hopefully things do return or the situation improves a bit, but I definitely think it's something to keep an eye on.
So basically, what the article I'm bringing to the table today is all about Nigeria and its Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy, I believe it's pronounced Bosun Tijani. He unveiled a new strategic blueprint for digital transformation, which includes a plan to train 3 million Nigerians with technical talents in the next 4 years leading up to 2027. And basically, between now and then, the ministry revealed it has three key objectives, which aim to accelerate the growth of Nigeria as a global technical talent hub and net exporter of talent, to deepen and accelerate its position in global research in key technology areas, and finally, raising the complexity and dynamics of Nigeria's economy by significantly increasing the level of digital literacy across the country. So, basically, regarding the talent development in Nigeria, its main goal is to train, as I said, 3 million early to mid career technical talents throughout the next 4 years. And its training plans to cover tech enabled and tech adjacent skills, core tech competencies, and advanced proficiency. So they're trying to cover the whole spectrum of tech talent. They're not just focusing on really advanced people in tech already and trying to advance them, but they're also trying to bring specifically, millions of people into the tech game, as it were, and specifically people that haven't been introduced to it before, as it tries to establish itself as a really core tech country, in the world and specifically in Africa. And should it meet this goal, it wants to retain at least half of these 1.5 million of these newly trained tech professionals within its local talent pool. And it hopes that it will only lose another 1.5 million to the global marketplace. So it's hoping to keep at least half of these. And really, if it does manage this and it does achieve this, it's a very, very ambitious goal. But it would have a massive impact, I'm sure, on Nigeria's economy for a start, but also just the development of technology, which would place it very far ahead if it achieves its goals of specifically other countries in Africa. And as I said at the start, another one of the key objectives that the ministry has is to develop digital literacy. And basically, it wants to ensure 95% digital literacy by 2030 as it looks to become a digitally inclusive nation. And it kind of just calls back onto what we've been talking about so far, just the importance of making sure people know how to use tech and what an impact that can have. If just people everyday lives are engaging with tech a lot more, it's going to have a massive impact on the country and really benefit its economy and all aspects of life. Its startups, companies, business development, productivity, etc. It's going to have a massive impact on everything. So the blueprint is also trying to talk about how it's going to introduce its national broadband plan to get broadband to people across the country, because at the moment its broadband penetration rate only sits around 50%. So half the country aren't even receiving the levels of broadband that they need at the moment. And another sort of area that I thought was really interesting, considering it's still a developing nation in this respect, is it's really pushing for the likes of AI and blockchain technologies and trying to develop these in the country. So it's not just a case of drastically implementing the relevant infrastructure in the country, but also keeping an eye on emerging technologies. And I thought that was really important and interesting to see that they really are trying to tackle everything at once, but it shows the importance that these emerging technologies are going to have in the future. And I just wanted to get your guys' take on, what do you think of this approach? Is it, in your opinion, key that countries like Nigeria and other countries, perhaps throughout Africa, focus on the likes of AI and blockchain while they're also focusing on other things as simple as digital literacy? I just thought it'd be good to get your take on how you think this kind of approach will go. So, Polly, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think it's all really positive. I don't really have anything bad to say about it at all. I think it's even just the broadband thing, getting the broadband plan of boosting the broadband penetration rate. Even that on its own will be completely I hate to use the word revolutionary, but like, that would be incredible. And to think how far they've got already, because I think you said the broadband penetration is at around 50%, but in 2015 it was in 6%, according to your fantastic article. So I think even that is an achievement in itself, and to get the broadband implementation up will really start to drive digital transformation in the region in a way that you can't have without it. Like, it is essential technology. But no, I think the push of digital transformation and the push to get digital literacy is fantastic, and it is so important if you want to drive towards being digital and having a digital economy, a digital nation, whatever. Then you need to start from the bottom up, and you need to start from your citizens. And I think to identify that in their strategy is fantastic, and I'm really quite impressed by all of it and just the general push. I think it is wonderful. And I think it kind of goes to show you, we all think of sort of Nigeria and other African countries as to being, less developed as other places. But if somewhere like Nigeria can put this big plan in place, and I have no doubt that they will carry it out, because I mean they've already had some great successes with similar kind of things. If they can do it, then why can't other places do it? Why can't we have that in other more developed, for want of a better phrase, countries? And to think that in the next few years we'll have 3 million Nigerians with technical talent that maybe you don't have elsewhere, I think that will be completely extraordinary. And I think it will do a lot of things for the Nigerian economy, because a lot of places will be looking towards Nigeria for the talent that they can't find elsewhere, especially in sort of I know a while ago we were kind of talking a lot about talent shortages and the lack of talent in the fintech space, but here are going to be millions of people ready to take it on. So I think it's an exciting time, and this sort of blueprint from Nigeria's come at a really good time, at a really positive time, at least to try and get into the market. And I just hope we see a lot of other countries and a lot of other governments follow suit with a similar kind of plan.
Yeah, exactly. I think you made a good point about the fact that something we've seen globally is a serious talent shortage at the moment, and we are always talking about developing technologies and new sectors and new bits of technology that are being implemented into all aspects of finance and technology, everywhere in every industry, but the talent just isn't catching up. And something in this country, I've obviously been to quite a lot of fintech events, and a lot of the topics are always centered around talent and talent acquisition and talent shortages. And the discussion is always, we have a problem, but it's really difficult to solve it. How do we solve this serious talent shortage? And it's a case of, how do we implement it into schools? How do we train more adults in these areas? And then you have a country like Nigeria that has this very ambitious plan, but it's setting it out in the next 4 years. We want to have trained 3 million people, and it could have a massive impact if it is successful and to a good level in alleviating this talent shortage, not only in Nigeria but across the world, but also putting Nigeria at the forefront of this solution. So I think it'd be really interesting to see what kind of impact this plan could have, not only across Nigeria but throughout the whole global tech scene. But Francis, what's your take on this now?
There was a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, really. I think there was one thing that I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember exactly if it was actually Nigeria or not. But I remember I think there was a cashless drive where the country basically was getting rid of all its old notes and was basically trying to enforce digital first payments. And then everyone went to banks, and it was this mass chaos, and it was everyone trying to withdraw their money from their bank accounts, and there wasn't enough money to go around, and it really was a disaster. But I think the reason I bring that up is because when you're talking about digital first and digital adoption and digital transformation, it has to have something to transform from. And I think when you really are struggling with having a currency, this can often be a challenge. But one thing that I do find really interesting is this idea of digital literacy and making sure that 95% of the population is going to be digitally aware by 2030. And I think when you combine that with the fact that Nigeria was the first African country to really launch a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, the e-naira, I think it is, or I think it is really important to sort of see it in the grander scheme of things, at how impactful that can be. Although the CBDC was originally, it didn't have a very much adoption after 1 year, it has actually increased 12-fold to 13 million users now. And I think when you really take that into consideration and how, what's the word? It's innovative. It really is, I suppose, of the country to be taking this step and exploring this central bank digital currency. I think it is a really important way, and it's a way to really appreciate the country as well. For Because I remember you were saying to like, is it a good thing that they're delving into blockchain technology? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. It is. It's really leading the way, and like you both mentioned, we're probably going to see other countries following suit, and that's not because, I mean, it is, sorry, because of the fact that it works so well, and it is so important to have this sort of level of transformation. So ultimately, I think it's great to sort of see that it's setting these aims. The important thing is just actually achieving them now. I mean, it's all well and good saying this is what we hope to do. Now they just got to put action to the words, and hopefully that will be the case.
Yeah, exactly. It's so good to see a country that obviously has recognized that it needs to develop its infrastructure, but also is keeping one eye on these emerging technologies that it can see is going to have a massive impact. And the fact that it's trying not to fall behind in that respect, and maybe even position itself as a leader, specifically in Africa at the very least, for the likes of AI and blockchain, could make it a very prosperous plan and decision come the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Quickly onto my one then. A very rapid change of pace. So I thought this was a really interesting one to talk to today, because I think we, at least I anyway, always talk about fintech working best in a niche and it operating in a niche. So when fintech can find a niche to be in, it kind of just works really nicely. And this is literally the nichest of niches. Well, it's not even that much of a niche, but very rarely do we ever see any financial products aimed at over 50s that aren't, like pensions or savings or retirement, things like that. I think, at least I've seen, if you guys have seen any, let me know. But I think to aim your product at the over 50s market is brilliant and it's genius. And I think, there is a lot of demand there for financial services for the over 50s clientele, and especially when, with sort of reduced admin and like easy access. And I know we all kind of make the mistake of thinking that anyone who's old can't access technology. I know we've talked about that ages ago on the podcast before, about like, just because you're over a certain age doesn't mean that you're now completely technologically illiterate, and you do have an understanding of things like that. But in order to kind of make things simpler, I think this is a really interesting partnership and a really interesting thing to launch. And I think especially when you think of sort of the wealth that people who are over 50s have, like they tend to be a little bit more affluent than younger people, just because they've had longer on this earth to get more money and earn more money. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of demand for, financial services, particularly with sort of like high deposit levels, because a lot of the, not high deposit, sorry, a lot of with like savings and stuff, because a lot of the savings things are usually aimed towards like younger people with like ISAs and things, where you put your money in an ISA and then you don't touch it for like 20 years until you're ready to buy a house or XYZ. So I think having specific products for the over 50s, I think, is really interesting. And I think especially because they are planning on becoming a super brand for older individuals in the UK and offering a curated range of products and services specifically for this age category. It's very interesting to me, and I just wanted to kind of talk about it and see what you guys thought, and whether, I guess, you think that this is sort of something that we're going to see a lot more of as we go, and kind of just what are your thoughts on this, Tom? Throwing it to you.
Yeah, well, as you said, I think this is only a good thing. It's I feel like I say this is my kind of saying in all these podcasts, but I feel like I can't believe we haven't seen this earlier. This type of thing, specifically, I mean, you called it the niches of niches, but I'm just not sure. Like, over 50s, I don't know what proportion of the population is over 50, but a significant proportion, it would be regardless. But I think it's perhaps one of the reasons we haven't seen these types of solutions specifically aimed at the over 50s is the fact that, we always hear about reports, the younger generations are the most digitally savvy. They're the ones looking at their finances more because they're actually, more engaged with financial technology. And it's the older generations that often seem to be missing out on, perhaps they're not engaging more, but this type of thing is going to have a significant impact, because it's aimed directly at those over 50. And I think it's the type of area that has obviously needed this type of action and a solution and savings account before. And it's good that we're finally getting one now for the over 50s. And it's not, going to be an age group that's neglected forever. And this type of partnership is going to have a good impact and hopefully support a lot of people as they try to save money in their later life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with everything you've said. I think it's it's hard to find a fault with it, really. But I mean, the king of devil's advocate, I'm sure, will find something to pick at it. So, Francis, why don't you go ahead?
Surprisingly not, no. I'm completely with you guys this time. I think it's like Tom said, I don't know how we haven't really seen anything like this sooner. And it's just a good thing. It's just more financially inclusive. There's no way to look at it and think that this is an issue or this is a problem. I think going forward, I don't know if we'll see things specifically for, over 50s, because I think as time goes on, the more and more people are going to be more digitally literate as we expect it to be in a way that we grow up with it as we get older and we're more likely to be on these platforms. It will already be used to it. So I don't know if we'll be getting things specifically made in the future, but for the time being, I can only say good things. I think it brings awareness for people that perhaps, I mean, we were talking about it earlier, the British population does have this I don't really care attitude associated with the culture. So I think, having a service which really does sort of lend itself to a specific niche group, it's only a good thing, and it can only help people who perhaps previously weren't aware of it. So yeah, no, I think it's great.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, I think on as like a final note, when we talk about financial inclusion a lot in fintech and in a lot of different ways, and I think people forget that means a lot of different things. And I think you nailed it there, Francis, that it also means having, solutions for like other people. It's not just about people who are like unbanked or things like that. It's about being inclusive to everyone and having products and services that are suitable for everyone's needs, no matter what those needs are. And I think this is a really great example of that, and how hopefully it'll work really well for the people it's designed for. So yeah, love that. Anyway, moving very swiftly on, thank you so much, guys, for bringing your articles to the conversation today. If you want to hear any more about anything we've spoken about today or anything else about fintech, head on over to fintechtimes.com, where you can read plenty more news and insights over there. But let's do what I learned this week. So each week we learn so much new stuff being on the editorial team, then we thought it would be fun to share that with our listeners. So Francis, what have you learned this week?
So this week I learned that 90% of consumers believe their financial provider could do more to protect them from fraud.
Love that. And Tom, what have you learned this week?
This week, I learned that 74% of business leaders in the UK see AI as their main way that they can mitigate risk as the economic conditions become more and more difficult in the UK.
Very interesting. And I learned that millennials and Gen X say they spend more than Gen Z when it comes to using buy now, pay later for online shopping over the past 12 months from a new survey from TransUnion. So amazing. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me once again for this riveting fintech chat, and I will catch you on the next one.
See you guys next week.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using hashtag TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.